Hello and welcome to our talk at the kitchen, our talk at the kitchen table. Today's readings is what we're going to discuss, and today's readings are really preparing us for the next few weeks. The next few weeks we're going to be focusing on the second coming of Christ and what that actually means. And today's reading was telling us to be prepared because we know neither the day nor the hour. The first reading today, as you saw, came from Wisdom, and it was trying to tell us that to be prepared, one should be wise enough to listen to what the Lord is saying, to listen to the gospel, to listen to who Jesus is. That was one way to be prepared. In the second reading from Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, Paul is speaking to the Thessaloniki, telling them that while people die and while they grieve the deaths of people, which was quite normal and quite understandable, he wanted them to grieve with hope. Because in light of the resurrection, that idea of grieving with hope is itself an acclamation of the resurrection of Christ. That death is not an end in itself, nor is it for eternity, but is a transition to a deeper life with Christ. And then finally in the gospel, we heard the parable of the 10 virgins, those who are prepared and those who are not, those who bring oil and those who don't. To be prepared when the bridegroom would come, thus to be prepared when Christ will come. Father Cletus.
Well, my take of the readings, as following from what you have just said, has to do with the fact that the first reading calls to mind about the need for wisdom, acting wisely. It's not so much, as it were, an intuitive knowledge or an academic knowledge that one is wise because you have that some kind of skill in getting around and getting things done. But wisdom, if we follow the book of Koheleth and also Ecclesiastes and all of that, has to do with the reality of God himself. God as the wisdom, and Jesus personifies this wisdom, the word becoming flesh. And this wisdom is that which is God, good, and the need for every individual to be able to really navigate through life by way of propagating goodness in the way we live. And Paul, in that second reading, calling to the Thessalonians to be mindful of the very reality of death, which is a transition into the next world, into which Jesus really encapsulates or embraces all of us into a new reality, a new way of life. As to what Paul was talking about, as a matter of fact, Paul he was just envisioning what this end point is going to be. But as to whether it is really actually going to happen the way he described it, we do not know. Nonetheless, there is certainly an end for all of us. And that end, as I take off from the very fact of wisdom being God, and God is good, and the need for us to lead righteous and virtuous life. Transpose that to the gospel reading today about those 5 virgins, those who were wise and those who were foolish. 10 of them, 5 wise, 5 foolish. Well, it has to do with light and the need for oil for their lights. I don't think these people were walking in separate channels or turbines, as it were, and for which light will not shine in the path of other people. But I think it has to do more or less about the individual conviction of himself of how good permeates his or her life and how we are taking this good to God's final end, which is having to embrace God in his totality and being part and parcel of that feast that the gospel speaks about.
Yes, and I agree with Father Cletus, but one of the things that we need to address is that when these were written, Paul lived in a pagan world. They lived in a world that they were surrounded by pagans. The Jews and the Christians lived in a very pagan society, with everything that that means, not only from worshiping idols, but also from a morality situation. Today, we live in a very secular world. So the question I think that we face daily is how are we believers in the death and resurrection of Jesus, and how do we live our Christian faith in a secular world, in a world that doesn't necessarily believe what we believe, nor does the world embrace or, for the most part, buttress the belief system and the morality that we have, and the values that we have. You know, years ago when I was a kid, that wasn't that long ago, there was a certain belief that what you learned in church on a Sunday, what you learned in school on a Monday, and how you went to work, the secular world, even the secular world, was somewhat religious. It didn't have a value system that was so different than what you learned in Sunday school. Today, that's not true. Today, there's a very big difference. There's a very big divergence between what we are staying in church, studying our scriptures, how we should be prepared to meet the Lord. It's very different. It's not the government, nor the governor, nor anyone else's job to keep us on the straight and narrow. Today, it's my job to tell you these things. It's our job to speak to each other about this and to be convinced and be convicted of our faith so that we can live an authentic Catholic life even in a countercultural situation as we are presently living. And when we do that, we make a statement. So, for example, if we find some of the gender issues these days, reproductive issues these days, as being very offensive, good. Don't do those things. Be convinced that we are following the way of the gospel. So we don't do those things. Not doing those things makes a very big statement. It makes a statement in and of itself. We must live. If we're living this faith, then we have to live this faith. Today is more difficult, perhaps, than it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago to live the faith, particularly for our younger people who have this plurality of moralities that is circulating around them. For us, we follow Christ. Father?
Well, taking clue from what Monsignor has just left off, as a matter of fact, faith is a lived experience. And this lived experience is not just being talked about, it is something that permeates whatever we do. It permeates in everything, every facet of our life. And this day and age is really, I look at myself, how did I actually embrace or come to this faith? I came to it by example from my grandmother, who would really teach us how to make the sign of the cross, talk about the values that matter in our lives, truthfulness, authenticity, being really real in whatever we do and whatever we say. So I think it's about time that we really pick up certain themes in our own homes. Yes, as ministers of the gospel, we'll continue to do what we do best by preaching the gospel. But the greater part of it has to do with how we are able to valorize or inculcate the values of the gospel in our own homes, and what we talk about and how we do things and all that help shape our values and how we transfer or transmit these values from one posterity to the other. And as Monsignor just said a while ago, we cannot, in this day and age, look up to the elected officials to be able to do these things for us. Sometimes people really campaign for votes and stuff like that, but then they look after themselves and they forget about those who have given them that power and authority. But if our values, if our faith really inform us to do what we do, we transfer that as to who we choose to represent us. We may not always be right, we may not always have, the people we want, but at the end of the day, the prayer, as I said yesterday, all that we can possibly do is to pray that those who control the secular order would put in place programs, policies, that will help us also live our lives and our faith in a way that will be more authentic to us and to our world.
But even if they don't, we should be living the faith.
Sure.
We should be living the faith in a world that is very, very different than the world, certainly that in which I grew up in. So now, there's also a prophetic voice for the believer, and that is to question the society in which we are living, saying this practice or that law is morally wrong. And therefore, we should protest those things and say, no, this is wrong. On the other hand, we must never do those things. We must never go the other way, because we have to make a firm commitment. It's clearly a choice. I'm going to follow the gospel or I'm not. And so that is what we're talking about in this authentic Catholic faith. This we do, this we don't do. And here are the reasons for that. That's what we need to know. Is this easy to do? No, it is not. Is it easy for our children to go to school and learn one sense of morality and come home and learn another? Or go to church and learn what their parents are trying to teach them at home? It must be very confusing. For those who are parents, that's why it's so important for you. For those who are clergy people, those who are catechists, how important it is to try to explain why we do things and why we don't for the glory of Christ.
Well, and as kind of a concluding remark on my part, all that we have been trying to put across is authenticity of our Christian experience. And that authenticity shines through our good works. And that is, as I said earlier on, wisdom of God, is found and expressed in the good lives that we lead. And that is the oil that really helps to turn the wheels of our faith and finally lead us to God's feast, the eternal kingdom.
And I also think you get pushback on that and different opinions. Fine. They can hold on to their opinion. This is what I do. This is like your mother telling you, you ever say to your parent, if you ever remember saying to your parent, oh, I want to do this, this, and this, and your mother says no. And then you say to her, but all the other kids are doing this. And your mother says, no, this is what we're doing. If they jumped off the roof, would you jump off the roof?
Absolutely
No.
not.
This is how we live in this house. The same mentality. Because of our faith, this is what we do, this is what we don't do. No matter what the structures around us are, that is what made Christianity so important. That's how it struggled through the Roman Empire. It struggled through other times of living too, by being an authentic Christian group. So how then do you prepare to meet the Lord? Whether it is in the return of the Lord at the end of time, your kingdom come, or whether you're tapped on the shoulder telling you it's time to go home. By living the faith every day. Good Sunday to you, and a good week, and please be safe.